I found out my sister's wedding date the same way everyone else did, through a Facebook post. I was sitting at my kitchen table on a quiet Sunday morning when my phone buzzed. A message from an old cousin I hadn't talked to in months popped up on my screen. "Hey, congrats to Emily! That venue looks amazing!" For a second, I just stared at it, trying to figure out what he meant. Then I opened Facebook, and there it was. A photo of Emily and her fiancé Mark standing in front of a lake somewhere, both of them smiling like they were already halfway into married life. Above the photo was a caption. "We're so excited to finally share our wedding date, September 14th at Willow Creek Lodge. Can't wait to celebrate with all our friends and family." Underneath it were dozens of comments. Congratulations, heart emojis, people tagging each other. And then one comment that stuck out to me. "Your whole family must be so excited." I kept reading the caption again and again, like maybe I'd missed something. But there was nothing there about telling me, nothing about a conversation, nothing about a call. Just the announcement. Public. Final. Already celebrated. And that's how I found out my younger sister had set her wedding date, before she had ever told me. I wish I could say I immediately got angry. That would have been simpler. Instead, I sat there for a while trying to convince myself it was probably a misunderstanding. Maybe she had tried to call me. Maybe Mom mentioned it and I forgot. Maybe there had been a group message I missed. So I scrolled through my phone. No calls from Emily, no texts, no family group message. The only thing in my notifications was that Facebook post, climbing higher and higher with new comments every minute. After a few minutes, my phone buzzed again. This time it was my Aunt Karen. "Daniel, I just saw the wedding announcement. Are you helping with planning?" I stared at that message longer than I probably should have. Helping with planning. The strange thing was, that question actually made sense to people who knew our family. Because if there was a big event, I was usually involved somehow. Not because I demanded to be, because I had always been the one people called when something needed to get done. I was the older brother. Emily was 8 years younger than me, and growing up, our family kind of settled into predictable roles. My parents were busy, Emily was the emotional center of the house, and I was the reliable one, the one who picked her up from school when Mom worked late, the one who helped her move into her first apartment, the one who drove 3 hours one winter to fix her car when it broke down. None of that was something I resented, at least not at the time. That was just how families worked as far as I understood it. You showed up for each other. So sitting there reading a public announcement about one of the biggest events of her life, before hearing about it from her directly, felt strange in a way I couldn't immediately name. Not dramatic, not explosive, just off. Like walking into a room where the furniture had been rearranged without anyone telling you. After a few more minutes, I decided the simplest thing to do was call her. Emily answered on the third ring. "Hey, Dan," she said, sounding cheerful. "What's up?" I hesitated for half a second. "Hey, I just saw your post." "Oh," she said. "The wedding announcement?" "Yeah." There was a tiny pause on the line. Not long, maybe a second, but long enough that I noticed it. "Isn't it exciting?" she said. "Yeah," I said. "September 14th. Mark and I finally locked down the venue. Willow Creek Lodge. It's beautiful. You should see it in person." I waited a moment. "You guys already booked it?" "Yeah," she said. "A couple weeks ago." Another small pause. Then I said the thing that had been sitting in the back of my mind since I opened the post. "I didn't know you'd picked a date." There was a slight shift in her voice when she answered. "Oh, I thought Mom told you." "No," I said. "Really?" "Really." She sounded genuinely surprised for a second, and I could almost hear her thinking. "Well, we've been talking about it for a while," she said. "I guess everything just came together fast." That explanation landed somewhere between reasonable and incomplete. "I mean," she added quickly, "you know how planning is. Once we found the venue, we had to grab the date before someone else did. Yeah, I said, and for a moment neither of us spoke. She started telling me about the lake, the trees around the lodge, the little outdoor ceremony space. I listened. I asked the right questions. I congratulated her, because that's what you're supposed to do when your sister tells you she's getting married. But somewhere in the middle of that conversation, another realization slipped quietly into place. This wasn't a new decision. They had already booked the venue, which meant they had already chosen the date, which meant they had probably been planning this for weeks, maybe longer. And in all that time, no one had mentioned it to me. Not Emily, not my parents, not even casually. When the call ended, she said something that stayed with me. "We'll have you come see the place soon. Everyone's really excited." Everyone. The word hung there a little longer than she probably intended. After we hung up, I sat back in my chair and looked at my phone again. The Facebook post had already passed 100 comments. People were sharing it, tagging relatives, celebrating something that, apparently, had been decided long before I knew it existed. About 20 minutes later, my mom called. "Daniel," she said, her voice warm but slightly cautious. "Did you see Emily's post?" "Yeah," I said. "She was worried you might feel left out if you heard about it online." I blinked. "That's interesting," I said. "What do you mean?" "Well," I said calmly, "I did hear about it online." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. "Oh," Mom said. "You didn't know the date either?" I asked. No, I knew," she said quickly. "I just thought I mentioned it to you already." "You didn't." Another pause. "Well," she said gently, "things have been moving quickly. The important thing is we're all happy for her." That phrase, "the important thing," was one my mother had used my entire life whenever she wanted a conversation to move away from uncomfortable details. The important thing is she's happy. The important thing is everyone's excited. The important thing is we're all together. Those kinds of sentences had a way of quietly ending discussions before they actually started. So I didn't push. "Yeah," I said, "of course." Mom sounded relieved. "She's been under a lot of stress with planning," she continued. "Weddings are complicated." "I'm sure they are." "And we'll all figure things out as we go," she said. Figure things out. Another familiar phrase. In our family, that usually meant decisions had already been made, and the rest of us were expected to adapt. Still, I told myself not to read too much into it. Families miscommunicate all the time. That's normal. What I didn't know yet was how far along those decisions already were. Over the next few days, the questions from relatives kept coming. Texts, emails, even a couple phone calls. People assumed I knew everything. "What color theme are they doing? Did you help pick the venue? Are you giving a speech?" Every time someone asked, I had to give the same awkward answer. "I actually just found out about the date myself." Some people laughed, thinking I was joking. Others went quiet. One evening, my Aunt Karen said something that made me stop. "I thought you were helping with the planning meetings," she said. "Planning meetings?" I asked. "Oh," she said, sounding slightly embarrassed. "Maybe I misunderstood." But the way she said it made it clear she hadn't misunderstood anything. Someone else had simply assumed I was involved. And for the first time, a small, uncomfortable question started forming in the back of my mind. How long had this been happening without me? A few days later, Emily texted me. "Hey, we're having dinner at Mom and Dad's on Thursday. Mark's parents will be there too. You should come." It sounded casual, friendly, normal. But something about the invitation felt different now. Not because I didn't want to see them, because I suddenly realized I might be walking into a conversation that had already been happening for weeks, without me. Still, I said yes, because for most of my life, that's what I did. I showed up. Thursday evening, I pulled into my parents' driveway about 10 minutes early. The house looked exactly the same as it always had. The same oak tree in the front yard, the same porch light that flicked on automatically when the sun started dropping behind the houses across the street. For a moment, I just sat in the car with the engine off. Not because I was nervous, more because I was trying to reset my expectations. I kept reminding myself that this was a wedding, a happy thing. Families got messy sometimes when big events happened. People forgot to call. Plans moved fast. None of that had to mean anything deeper. So I got out of the car and walked up to the front door. I could hear voices inside already, a lot of them. Mom opened the door before I even knocked. "Daniel," she said warmly, pulling me into a quick hug. We were just about to start. Inside the dining room, the table was already full. Emily sat near the center beside Mark. His parents were there too. Nice people from what I'd seen so far. Quiet, polite. The kind of couple who looked like they had spent most of their lives trying not to make situations uncomfortable for anyone. My dad sat at the end of the table, talking about parking arrangements at some venue. Emily brightened when she saw me. "There he is," she said. "The last one to arrive." I glanced at the clock on the wall. "I'm early," I said. She laughed. "Technically." I took the open seat across from Mark. Dinner started in that slightly awkward way family dinners sometimes do when people who don't fully know each other are sharing the table. Small talk, weather, travel times. Mark's parents talking about how beautiful Willow Creek Lodge looked in the photos. And that's when the conversations started shifting. "So we've pretty much locked down the ceremony schedule," Emily said casually while reaching for a glass of water. I looked up. "Schedule?" "Yeah," she said. "The ceremony will be outside by the lake, cocktail hour on the patio, reception inside the main hall." She said it like someone explaining a plan that had been settled for a while. Dad nodded. "The place is really well set up for it," he added. "Parking's a little tight, but we'll figure that out." Mark leaned toward me. "You should come see it sometime," he said. "The property's amazing." "Yeah," I said. "Emily mentioned that." Emily continued talking. "We've already started working with a coordinator at the lodge. She's great, really organized." I listened carefully to the words she was using. Already started, working with a coordinator. And slowly it became clear that this wasn't the early stages of planning. This was the middle of it. "So invitations will probably go out next month," Mom said. Mark's mother nodded approvingly. "That gives everyone plenty of notice." I felt like I had stepped into the middle of a meeting that had been happening long before I walked through the door. And for a few minutes, I just let the conversation move around me, because interrupting it would have felt strange. But eventually, curiosity got the better of me. "So, how long have you guys been planning all this?" I asked. Emily looked up. "Oh, a couple months," she said. "A couple months?" "Well," she clarified, "seriously planning for maybe 6 weeks." 6 weeks? I nodded slowly. "That's a lot to get done in 6 weeks." She shrugged lightly. "Once we found the venue, everything kind of snowballed." Mom jumped in, and Emily's been incredibly organized about it. I noticed something then. Everyone at the table seemed comfortable discussing the details. Not hesitant, not cautious, just familiar. Which meant these conversations had probably already happened multiple times. I had simply missed them. At one point, Mark pulled out his phone and started showing his parents pictures of the ceremony space, the lake, the trees, the wooden arch where the vows would happen. Everyone leaned closer to look. I did too. But while they were admiring the scenery, another realization quietly slid into place. This wasn't just planning. This was coordination, which meant roles had probably already been assigned. So after a moment, I asked another simple question. Who's handling the ceremony stuff? Emily glanced at Mark, then back at me. Oh, she said. Our cousin Ryan is helping with a lot of that. Ryan? Yeah, he offered to help coordinate the ceremony lineup and timing. Ryan was our cousin on Mom's side. Nice guy, a few years younger than me. Not someone I would normally associate with wedding logistics. That's great, I said. But inside, my mind was quietly rearranging the information. Ryan handling the ceremony lineup, which meant he was involved in planning the ceremony itself, which usually included things like processional order, speeches, family roles. Another small piece of the puzzle shifted. I didn't say anything about it right then. Dinner moved forward. More conversation, more details, flower arrangements, guest lists. At one point, Emily mentioned they were finalizing the seating chart. That was the moment when the scale of the situation really hit me. Seating charts usually came later, much later, which meant the guest list had already been finalized. And somehow my involvement in that process had never come up. Not because I expected to control it, but because in most families, those kinds of conversations happened naturally. Someone would ask, someone would mention relatives, someone would check in. None of that had happened with me. Then halfway through dinner, Mom said something that shifted the tone of the conversation again. "Oh, Daniel," she said, like she had just remembered something. "Yes? We were actually meaning to talk to you about something." I set my fork down. "Okay." She glanced at Dad briefly before continuing. "Well, as you know, weddings can get expensive." That sentence had a very familiar rhythm. I had heard versions of it many times over the years, usually before someone asked for help. "Of course," I said calmly. Emily leaned forward slightly. "We're trying to keep things reasonable," she said quickly. "But the venue requires a pretty big deposit." Mark nodded. "And we've been trying to spread the costs out so it's not overwhelming." I listened quietly. Then Dad spoke. "We were wondering if you might be able to help out a little." There it was. Not dramatic, not confrontational, just practical. The reliable one being asked to step in. For a moment, no one spoke. And the strange thing was, part of me had expected that question. Not consciously, but somewhere underneath everything else, the pattern was familiar. Major family event, unexpected expense, Daniel helps stabilize things. For most of my adult life, I had said yes to those moments. Helping Emily with rent during a tough year. Helping my parents replace their furnace one winter. None of it had ever felt forced. But sitting there now, in the middle of a wedding planning process that had apparently been happening for 6 weeks without me knowing about it, the request landed differently. Not offensive, just revealing. Because suddenly the roles were clear. Planning decisions? Already handled. Financial support? Open for discussion. I took a slow sip of water before answering. "How much are you thinking?" Emily hesitated. Then she named a number. It wasn't outrageous, but it wasn't small either. The table went quiet while they waited for my reaction, and for a moment I thought about how easy it would be to say yes. It would smooth everything over instantly. No tension, no awkwardness, just the familiar rhythm of family cooperation. But another thought had started forming quietly in the back of my mind over the past few days. Not an angry thought, a clarifying one. Because for the first time, I was seeing the structure of the situation more clearly. I wasn't being excluded because someone hated me. I was being excluded because including me earlier might have complicated decisions, especially expensive ones. And once those decisions were finalized, my role became useful again, financially, practically, dependably. And sitting there at that table, watching everyone wait for my answer, I realized something that hadn't been obvious to me before. I had always believed my reliability meant I was deeply included in the family. But reliability and inclusion weren't actually the same thing. Sometimes reliability simply made it easier for people not to worry about whether you were included. That realization didn't make me angry. If anything, it made me calmer. Because once you understand the structure of a situation, you can choose how to respond to it. I looked at Emily, then at my parents, then back at my sister. "I'm really happy for you," I said. She smiled with relief. "But I think you guys have already done a great job organizing everything," I continued. Her smile flickered slightly. "So I'm going to step back a little and let you handle the rest of the planning." The sentence was polite, measured, but it wasn't the answer they expected. Mom blinked. "What do you mean?" "I mean, it sounds like everything's already pretty well arranged," I said. "Venue, coordinator, guest list." Dad leaned back in his chair. "Well, yes, and I don't want to complicate things now that it's all in motion," I added calmly. The phrase hung in the air for a second. Complicate things. Emily shifted slightly in her seat. "We're not asking you to plan anything," she said gently. "Just help a little." "I understand." Another quiet moment passed. Then I said something that had been forming slowly in my mind since the Facebook post. "You know," I said, "sometimes you only really notice a family pattern once you step back and look at how the pieces fit together." No one spoke. It wasn't an accusation, just an observation. "I think you guys have this handled," I finished. Emily didn't argue, but I could see the confusion in her eyes. Because up until that moment, the pattern had always worked the same way, and for the first time, I had quietly stepped out of it. No one argued with me that night, at least not directly. The conversation at the table drifted back to safer territory after that. Mark's parents started asking about hotel options near the venue. Dad talked about traffic patterns around the lodge. Mom refilled people's glasses and asked if anyone wanted more bread. But something in the atmosphere had shifted. Not dramatically, just enough that everyone seemed a little more careful about what they said. Emily didn't bring up the money again. She kept smiling and talking about decorations and music and the ceremony timeline, but I could tell she was thinking about my answer. I wasn't angry. That part is important. If anything, I felt strangely calm during the rest of the dinner. Because the moment I said I was stepping back, something inside me had settled into place. For most of my life, I had believed that being a good son and brother meant anticipating what the family needed before they even asked. If something broke, I fixed it. If someone struggled, I stepped in. If a situation felt tense, I made myself easy to work with. Not because anyone forced me to, because I believed that was how families stayed strong. But sitting there that night, watching a wedding take shape around decisions I hadn't been part of, I realized something simple. Helping someone and belonging in their life were not the same thing. Dinner ended around 9. Mark's parents left first, thanking everyone for the evening. Emily walked them to the door while Mom gathered plates in the kitchen. Dad stayed at the table with me. He folded his hands together and looked at me in that quiet way he had when he was deciding whether to say something. "You know your sister didn't mean to leave you out," he said. I nodded. "I'm sure she didn't." He studied my face for a moment. "But?" There was no accusation in his voice, just curiosity. I leaned back slightly in the chair. "It's not really about intention," I said. "What do you mean?" It's about how things happened. Dad waited, so I continued. They planned the venue, the date, the guest list, the ceremony structure, the coordinator, the invitations. Yes, he said slowly, all before anyone mentioned any of it to me. He didn't deny it. That's true. So when the first conversation I have about the wedding is about helping pay for it, I said calmly, that tells me where I fit in the process. Dad was quiet for a moment. Then he sighed softly. I can see why that might feel uneven. Uneven. That was a fair word. I'm not upset, I told him. I didn't say you were. I just think it's better if I step back and let them handle their plans the way they want. Dad nodded slowly. I suppose that's your choice. It is. We sat there for another minute in comfortable silence. Then he said something that surprised me. You've always been the one who stepped in. I know. And sometimes, he added carefully, when someone does that long enough, people stop asking if they should. That sentence stayed with me long after I left the house that night, because it wasn't defensive. If anything, it was honest. Over the next couple weeks, the wedding conversation continued around me in small ways. Emily texted occasionally with updates, pictures of dress fittings, photos of flower arrangements, ideas for table decorations. I responded politely, supportively, but I stayed outside the planning itself. And slowly, the tone of our conversations shifted. At first, she seemed unsure how to interpret my distance, then curious, finally a little uncomfortable. About 3 weeks after that dinner, she called me one evening. Hey, she said. Hey. There was a pause. I wanted to ask you something. Okay. Are you mad at me? Her voice wasn't defensive. It sounded genuinely worried. No, I said. Because you've been kind of distant. I've been trying to give you space to plan your wedding the way you want. That's not what I meant, she said quickly. Another pause. Then she said something more carefully. I thought you'd be more involved. The sentence almost made me smile. Why? Well, you're my brother. I still am. You know what I mean. I did, but I also understood something now that I hadn't fully seen before. For years, my involvement had been assumed, not invited, not discussed, just expected. And expectations have a strange way of becoming invisible when they're never questioned. Emily, I said gently, when you and Mark started planning the wedding, did it ever occur to you to call me? She hesitated. I thought Mom told you. I know. But you knew the venue weeks before that. Another pause. I guess we just got caught up in everything. I understand that. You really don't sound angry, she said. I'm not. Then why does this feel weird? That was a fair question. Because the truth was, nothing dramatic had happened. No argument, no confrontation, just a quiet shift. Because, I said slowly, this is the first time I didn't automatically step into the role everyone expected. She was silent for a moment. I never thought of it like that. I know. Another pause stretched between us. Then she asked something more directly. So you're really not going to help with the wedding? I'm happy to attend, I said, but I think you and Mark have the planning under control. She didn't argue, but I could hear the wheels turning in her mind. Because when someone stops playing a role that's existed for years, it forces everyone else to look at the structure of things differently. The wedding arrived 4 months later, September 14th. Willow Creek Lodge looked exactly like the photos Mark had shown at dinner.
Tall trees around the lake, a wooden ceremony arch covered in white flowers, rows of chairs set up on the grass. It was beautiful. I arrived about 15 minutes before the ceremony started, just another guest walking across the lawn. And for the first time in my life, attending a family milestone without any responsibilities attached to it. No coordination, no speeches, no problem solving. Just presence. I found my seat about halfway back. From there, I could see Emily standing near the lodge with her bridesmaids, adjusting her dress while the photographer took pictures. She looked happy, truly happy. And seeing that, I felt something settle quietly inside me. Because the point of everything that had happened over the previous months wasn't to punish anyone. It wasn't about revenge. It was about clarity. About understanding that love inside a family doesn't always mean the same thing to everyone. The ceremony started a few minutes later. Music played, guests stood. Emily walked down the aisle with Dad. Ryan, our cousin, handled the ceremony coordination exactly the way she had planned. Everything ran smoothly, exactly as they had organized it. And sitting there, watching it unfold, I realized something that might have been impossible for me to see before. The wedding didn't actually need me to function. The planning didn't need me. The logistics didn't need me.
And that realization didn't feel painful. It felt honest. Because for years I had quietly believed that my reliability made me essential to the family. But families don't always organize themselves around necessity. Sometimes they organize themselves around convenience. And once you understand that, the choices become clearer. After the ceremony, Emily made her way through the crowd greeting guests. When she reached me, she wrapped her arms around me in a quick hug. "I'm glad you came," she said. "Of course." "You look relaxed," she added with a small smile. "I am." She studied my face for a moment, then she said something quietly. "I think I understand what you meant now." "About what?" "About roles." I didn't respond. She continued. "I guess I just assumed you'd always step in. That's how it's always worked." "Yeah." There was no resentment in her voice, just recognition. And sometimes recognition is more important than apology. The reception carried on through the evening. Music, dinner, speeches, laughter. At one point, I stepped outside onto the patio overlooking the lake. The sun was setting behind the trees, turning the water a deep orange. Dad joined me after a minute. "Beautiful place," he said. "It is." We stood there quietly watching the light fade across the lake. "You seem lighter," he said after a while. "I feel lighter." He nodded. "Boundaries can do that." It wasn't a word my father had used often when I was growing up, but hearing it now felt right. Because that was really what had changed. Not love, not loyalty, just the shape of the expectations between us. Later that night, I said goodbye to Emily and Mark and headed toward the parking lot. As I walked across the grass, I could hear the music from the reception behind me. People laughing, glasses clinking. A celebration continuing exactly the way it was meant to. And for the first time in a long while, I understood something clearly. Family patterns often stay invisible for years, not because they're hidden, because everyone quietly agrees to play their part. But the moment one person steps out of that role, the structure becomes visible to everyone. Not as an attack, not as revenge, just as truth. And sometimes that quiet kind of truth changes a family more than any argument ever could.